Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story, where each weekday we tackle a single relevant question based on our Bible reading for that day. This week our reading is centered around the book of 1 Timothy, and today I'm joined by Alyssa Bream and Zack Unkenholz, and we're going to look at a passage in 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 16, 3 verses 1 through 16. Here he gives some instructions for, this translation uses the church leader. We would say elders, bishops, overseers. It just depends on the translation, how it shows up. And then instructions for deacons. So I'll just read the whole passage. He says, "This is a trustworthy saying. If someone aspires to be a church leader, he desires an honorable position. So a church leader must be a man whose life is above reproach. He must be faithful to his wife. He must exercise self-control, live wisely, and have a good reputation. He must enjoy having guests in his home, and he must be able to teach. He must not be a heavy drinker or be violent. He must be gentle, not quarrelsome, not love money. He must manage his own family well, having children who respect and obey him. For if a man cannot manage his own household, how can he take care of God's church? A church leader must not be a new believer, because he might become proud and the devil would cause him to fall. Also, people outside the church must speak well of him, so that he will not be disgraced and fall into the devil's trap. In the same way, deacons must be well respected and have integrity. They must not be heavy drinkers or dishonest with money. They must be committed to the mystery of the faith now revealed and must live with a clear conscience. Before they are appointed as deacons, let them be closely examined, and if they pass the test, then let them serve as deacons. In the same way, their wives must be respected and must not slander others. They must exercise self-control and be faithful in everything they do. A deacon must be faithful to his wife. He must manage his children and household well. Those who do well as deacons will be rewarded with respect from others and will have increased confidence in their faith." So, we use the term elder. As I said, some translations might use the word overseer here. But the question, two questions really. What are the differences between the expectations between deacons and elders? And are there any of these expectations that are more important than others?
I think the biggest difference, there's two differences that I noticed, because like even the way they say things about the family has to generally be in good order and like not quarrelsome, like those kind of things, even though they're worded differently, maybe they're the same. The two things that I see with elder, or the first position that's talked about, is that they can't be new followers, that they need to be seasoned in the faith. And I don't see anything about that in the deacons. And then also that they must be well thought of throughout the community beyond just the church people. Those are the two things that I see as the differences between the...
And why do you think those are separators between an elder and a deacon?
Because I think I was just looking at some different versions, because, man, if you read some different versions of this, you get some wildly different, very
Text.
keywords differently.
Right. Yes,
different.
very keywords.
And so they call the first group of people the officials, and the second group the officers, which I think is interesting, because officials are people that deal with the community interacting with the church, that oversee things on a grander scale. And I think officers are people that help within the church more. So they people that see them outside of the church don't necessarily equate them with the church, whereas the officials, the elders, would be more equated with the church.
It's kind of like when you think of, when you look at this, elders or deacons, who is more important, or, what the different qualifications and things like that. I think the reason why there's different expectations is because they serve different roles. And it's not that one is more important than the other. They just serve different purposes or different functions. Like, as a servant in the body of God, one's like the hand and one's the feet, like one is there to help make decisions and with changes in the church and oversee some of the, like you said, like officials, that's a good word for it. And I think when I think of elders, that's exactly what I think of. When I think of deacons, I think of the people that are serving the people, going into the people's lives, helping to shepherd people, and I think that is they're just they serve different functions. You wouldn't, you need different things. Like for a hand, you need a lot of dexterity in your thumb, whereas in your big toe, you don't need the same amount of dexterity, but you need it to serve different purposes, right? A foot needs to be pretty tough because you're walking on it all the time.
So you're saying elders are hands and deacons are toes.
Okay, that that sounds bad. I'm just saying they're like the different parts of the body of God. They're different parts of the body of Christ. They serve different uh they serve different purposes, and I don't think we should look down on one or say, oh, this is better than the other. I think that they are, because I think that I've seen churches where it's like deacon's the first step to becoming an elder. I got to serve my time as a deacon in order to become an elder. And I don't think that we should look at it that way, because I think that they do serve different functions and purposes, and we should have different expectations for them. But there's a reason why so many of these expectations are shared for both, because I think we should want that for anybody who's in a position of leadership or has influence in the church. I think we should be careful about who we choose.
Did you grow up with deacons and elders?
We had neither,
Okay.
actually. In the
That ain't biblical.
Yeah,
Just kidding.
The church model that they used would have been, they called it a church and pastors council. That was the body, and they were voted on by the church. Usually a pretty powerful group in the church. In my lifetime, early in my early years, it was only men. It later changed to where it could be men and women. And as I saw women begin to move into that role, that was a new thing. I would say that group functioned very much like deacons do in the majority of churches. So the overwhelming majority of churches, particularly in a Baptist tradition, only use deacons. They do not have elders, not by name. The overwhelming majority of them use deacons, and they are the decision-making group and the service side as well. They're combined, and there is probably some reasons for that. That they do it that way. As a matter of fact, when I first started on staff here at Open Door, we only had deacons. That was one of the changes that I wanted to push through, is because as I was growing in my understanding of what the Word of God said, that I believed there was a distinction between the two, and it was obvious to my eye here, because this was my first involvement. There were men who were great servants, but when it came time for making a decision, if they knew a difficult decision was on the agenda, they would miss the meeting. Like they just wouldn't even come because they just didn't want any parts of it. There were other people who ran to those decisions. They had to be nurtured more to the care side. And it became obvious that there were giftings that people had, whether we view these as callings or offices, and we've had that conversation before. I do think the two distinctions that I have always observed were the two you pointed out. They had to have a good reputation outside of the church, not just inside of the church. So they had to, and they couldn't be a novice. And I think a novice, I think the reputation outside of the church is gained over a longer period of time. And so the two kind of go together. The thing that I did notice this time that I hadn't paid a lot of attention to, and I would probably offer an explanation for it, is the elders had to be hospitable. Titus tells us they have to be able to teach. He makes a different distinction about elders, but he says they have to be willing to welcome. He must enjoy having guests in his homes. This one says he must be able to teach. Now, we have elders that are not teaching elders. I guess it's Titus that doesn't include that qualification. But I would probably argue in this setting that a lot of these what we would call church meetings were happening in homes. And it was the elders who were inviting people into their home. They had to be hospitable, they had to be willing to welcome people. And then they had to be able to teach it once they got there. That was one of the assignments of Timothy, is to go from church to church and choose out elders, pick elders to oversee the church. And so here in our context, we have deacons and elders. And as we're recording this, we're in the process of adding. We'll be in the process of adding new people to serve in different positions. And one of the things that I tell people when they become a deacon is this is not a decision-making group. Like the pressure to decide is taken off of you. And in our situation, it doesn't matter whether we consider them pastoral elders or non-pastoral elders. That's not the terminology we use. So we have a board of elders that includes 2 of our pastors. But in general, the way we operate with pastoral elders and non-pastoral elders, because we're a staff-led church and the staff makes much of our decisions. But it is not I would describe our deacons as an extension of pastoral care. They're there to serve the people, to connect with the people, to help the people. It's not that staff or elders don't serve; they just serve in a different capacity, and the weight of leadership is more heavy. And so I think it is important for us to understand. And when we choose, we should choose wisely. I have over the years served with some bad leaders, and I've served when I want to be careful what I say. I almost overstepped. Let me reel that back in. Currently, the elder board that we have here at the church, I'm anxious because at some point there's going to be change that happens there, and I'm anxious about it because this board has been able to walk through some very, very, very difficult situations and do it with integrity and honor, and that is very difficult to pull off sometimes. And I have been in other situations where it wasn't as safe, from a leadership standpoint. It wasn't as safe. That's a good word to put. Because when people lead well, the people that follow feel safe. When they don't lead well and it creates uncertainty, earlier this week we talked about praying for our leaders so that we live a peaceful and quiet life. When leaders are doing the right thing with honor and integrity, it makes our lives much more peaceful and quiet. When they don't, it creates lots of disruption. And so who we choose for those positions is extremely important. Anything y'all want to... Did you grow up with elders and deacons?
We had a board.
Yeah.
So we had board members.
Right.
We didn't call them deacons or elders. I would say they probably functioned more like just decision makers,
Mm-hmm.
not that they weren't ministry leaders in other ways, but you didn't have to, yeah.
And I if I had to guess, based on what I know about the Pentecostal church, which our traditions weren't foreign to one another.
We didn't have beehives.
We didn't
have beehives.
By the time you came along. They did at some point in their time. But it appears that was a piece of rebellion, a distinction for them that they choose. Now most of those denominations now have adopted elders and deacons in some form or fashion. And some churches use it, and some churches don't. Did you have elders and deacons?
We did, yeah. We had elders and deacons, and they served different purposes, and yeah, that was I always grew up with.
Yeah, it's I think it's important for people to operate in their gifts and in a biblical defined role. And when we choose the right people, church leadership is better. When we choose the wrong people, churches are in trouble. Well, thank you for joining us today on this edition of One Single Story. We hope you'll be back with us tomorrow as we continue our conversation around 1 Timothy.